Guys, what is gonna happen to the Pac-12? There's this article predicting where every Pac-12 team would end up if the conference straight up disbanded. Right now, I think the Pac-12's best chance at survival is becoming a subconference similar to what the Big 12 did when they lost to Texas and Oklahoma, and you bring in maybe a BYU. I don't know if they'd be able to. I don't know what BYU's status is as an independent. You could maybe bring in San Diego State, Boise State. That's kind of what they talk about out of the Mountain West. But there is just no chance that Oregon and Washington, but especially Oregon, are going to want to remain in the Pac-12 after this move. And you can see this article, it talks about where the different teams are going to go. And you can see in this article, it's very interesting. It has Stanford as an independent, which feels like it could happen. Like, they're very similar to Notre Dame in the way their program is structured. So Stanford as an independent, but many of these teams going to the Big 12. It's almost like you're going to see Oregon and Washington go to the Big 10, USC, UCLA already in the Big 10, and the Big 12 kind of becomes this major feeder conference almost, to where they take a team like an Oregon State, like an Arizona, right? Similar to the way they took Cincinnati, Houston, things like that. So does the Big 12 become kind of the third mega conference? Because right now we're expecting the two mega conferences in the future in the SEC and the Big 10. Does the Big 12 kind of become a worse version of that? If a team like Oregon State moves to the Big 12, if a team like Arizona moves to the Big 12, Arizona State, does that become like kind of the third mega conference, which at that point, you would have the two major superpowers, the third mega conference below it, and then whatever the heck the Pac-12... I'm wondering if the Pac-12 is just going to completely dissolve at this point, guys. I don't know what the future is, because there's no way Oregon and Washington are going to stay there. If you were able to convince Oregon and Washington to stay in the Pac-12, you could try and do a pivot like the Big 12 did, and try and replace those teams. Obviously, it's impossible to replace USC and UCLA, but you could do what the Big 12 did, and you could go and ask BYU to join. They're currently an independent. You could go poach some of the better teams out of the Mountain West, like a San Diego State or a Boise State, who's had a lot of success recently. But yeah, guys, I was just thinking about it, like, the ACC is the other wild card, and that's the whole Notre Dame thing. But right now, we know the working theory is the big-time ACC teams are going to leave the conference, the ACC. If Notre Dame doesn't join the ACC, we're going to see Clemson go to the SEC. We're going to see Florida State go to the SEC. And the reason those teams would go to the SEC and not the Big Ten is because the Big Ten would be getting Washington and Oregon. And the way the academics are structured within these programs, Clemson is a better fit in the SEC. Florida State is a better fit in the SEC. North Carolina would be a better fit in the SEC. You guys got to remember, these conferences, some of it is college basketball. I mean, with a team like Duke, if you're going to add Duke, like the Big Ten could try and add Duke because it lines up academically and they've got the major basketball power. Duke is one of the only profitable college basketball programs. It basically, all of these programs' profits come from college football. That's why we're seeing the ridiculous move of USC and UCLA, two teams from the state of California, into the Big Ten Conference, because they're going to make so much more money. Every other sport, all of these moves, except for special cases, like if you're Duke and you're basically the number one or number two college program in terms of making money for basketball, these programs are making their decisions entirely based off of football. They don't care how it affects their basketball program. They don't care how They don't care how it affects their swimming, their volleyball, their baseball. I know a lot of people were saying in the comments like, the Pac-12 has good volleyball. It doesn't matter. That those sports operate on a college level at a negative. College baseball operates in the red. The only reason it's able to exist is because of the football revenue, the revenue that college football generates. So all of these programs will be making their decisions off of how they can get more money in the sport of college football. And Clemson lines up with the SEC in terms of how those programs operate a lot better than Clemson lining up with the Big Ten. That's why I think Clemson, if we do get the two super conferences, we see Clemson, the major teams in the ACC, we see Clemson, we see Florida State, we see North Carolina possibly going to the SEC, and the Big Ten would take the Big Ten would take Notre Dame, Washington, Oregon, and maybe Stanford, although that was a very interesting article talking about Stanford possibly being an independent. I think that's a very, kind of interesting projection that could happen because Stanford is similar, again, to Notre Dame. But guys, I'm thinking about this setup right now. We could actually get a 3-team super conference if the Big 12 poaches some of these Pac-12 teams. If the Pac-12 completely dissolves or totally becomes a subconference, if they lose Washington and Oregon, they're basically a group of 5 at that point. That's what the Pac-12 is. They're a group of 5. The Pac-12 got trampled and got crushed because they didn't generate enough revenue. They didn't have a good enough TV contract, so their major players left. Same thing that happened to the Big 12 with Texas and Oklahoma. Guys, the Texas and Oklahoma move, that's why this is all happening. It's unfortunate, it's sad, but right now I think we're setting up for the 2 mega conferences with the Big 10 and the SEC, then another mega conference that's worse with the Big 12, because the Big 12 we've seen them poach other leagues. They're getting 4 teams from the American. You don't think they're going to try and poach more teams from either the ACC or the Pac-12? 100%. They don't want to get left behind. They're not going to be as good of a conference as the Big 10 or the SEC, but they can still be relevant. Those teams, at this point, they just want to be relevant. Oklahoma State just wants to be relevant. TCU just wants to be relevant. So their best decision is going to be attracting other teams, and I think that's what's going to end up happening. But guys, the Pac-12 right now is on its deathbed. The ACC, in my opinion, is on its deathbed. The Big 12, it can continue to expand. It can try and poach teams from the ACC, from the Pac-12. And then obviously you've got the Big 10, who is looking at a total expansion. Guys, when it comes to this year, my speculation this offseason, I don't think the Big Ten is adding any more teams, but in the 2023 offseason, you're going to see Oregon and Washington go to the Big Ten and Notre Dame go to the Big Ten in the 2023 offseason. That's my projection on that. That's what I think is going to happen. I think Notre Dame at this point, being an independent, joining the Big Ten is makes so much more sense financially. And just in terms of the way college, really, when you think about it, if we expand to a 12-team playoff, Notre Dame could be an independent and still survive just fine. But I think they're not going to turn down the TV money. They're going to get I know they have their exclusive deal with NBC. They're going to get so much more if they're just part of the Big Ten. They're going to make so much more money. So that's why you think they would end up joining the Big Ten. I know their NBC contract is up in 2024, I believe. So that'll be interesting to watch if they can get out of that earlier. We've got all these teams trying to get out of TV deals. But right now, guys, the next major domino, I'm guessing it's going to be because the thing is the Big Ten wants to wait for Notre Dame. I would say it's going to be Oregon and Washington joining the Big Ten because Oregon wants out immediately. I don't know exactly Washington's motivation level. I would imagine they would want out, but I know Oregon is a team on the rise. They're using the NIL. They're in it for 5-star quarterbacks. They want out of that conference ASAP because they don't want to be irrelevant. That conference is turning into right now, the state of the Pac-12 right now, it's a subconference. That's what I would classify it as. It's a subconference. If you lose USC and UCLA this coming year, obviously it'll be interesting. What happens to Utah, right? Utah has been a team. They're going to be really good next year. USC is still going to be in the Pac-12 for the next 2 years, so that's not going to be an issue when it comes to next year, but it is something, what happens to a team like Utah? Do they maybe join the Big 12? Does the Big 12 look for them? Because the Big 12 is trying to stay alive right now. The Big 12 is just trying to exist, and they're saying, listen, we can poach these teams from the Pac-12 and say, we might not have as good of a super conference as the SEC or the Big 10, but we can still be relevant. At this point, you're battling relevancy. You want to stay relevant if you're any of these teams. That's why Oregon wants out now. They want out. And we will see what a lot of these teams do. We've heard reports, multiple Pac-12 teams have asked the Big Ten if they can join, and the Big Ten says we got to reevaluate things, basically come back next summer. At least that's my speculation. Maybe they'll accept them in 2 weeks. We don't know. But that's my speculation. They're going to wait, and we'll see. But guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.